What if AI could uncover millions of hidden revenue opportunities your team could never find on its own? Think about your last pricing decision. Was it driven by instinct or by data powerful enough to outthink your competition? My guest today, Michael Healy, has transformed revenue growth management at PepsiCo, InBev, and Reynolds. Now as the head of RGM at BAT, he's proving how AI can rewrite the playbook for pricing, promotions, and consumer analytics. In this conversation, we break down how AI-driven promo modeling strengthens retailer partnerships, why the arms race in data infrastructure will decide the winners, and what every executive needs to know about the biggest misconceptions in AI pricing.
If you don't put the investment in that place today, your competitor is going to.
Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Reimagine with AI, brought to you by Sigmoid. I'm your host, Imtiaz Ahmed, and I help executive leaders create value with the smartest minds in artificial intelligence. You may not realize it, but behind every major innovation in retail, media, and technology, there's a team wrestling with how to make AI real and valuable inside massively complicated matrixed organizations. On this show, I sit down with the business and technology leaders who are doing exactly that. Reimagined AI explores how today's most forward-thinking enterprises are using data, AI, and automation to transform how they operate and how they grow. Because it's not just about adopting new tools, it's about reimagining what's possible. Let's get into it. Welcome to Reimagine with AI. My guest today has transformed revenue growth management at some of the world's biggest consumer goods companies. At PepsiCo, he helped lead AI-driven pricing and trade spend optimization. At InBev, he built global RGM capabilities across the beverages category. At Reynolds, he turned around multi-billion-dollar investment programs and made Vuse the #1 vapor brand in the US. And now, as the head of RGM at BAT, he's redefining how pricing, promotions, and consumer analytics drive growth in one of the most regulated categories in the world. Mike Healy knows better than anyone how AI is reshaping revenue growth management. In this conversation, we deep dive into pricing optimization, promo modeling, and how consumer insights powered by analytics are unlocking revenue opportunities that were just unthinkable a few years ago. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, MTS. Happy to be here.
So I want to dive right in. The future of RGM with AI. You've done a RGM at PepsiCo, at AB InBev, Reynolds, and you're at BAT. Looking across all of this vast experience that you've had across the CPG sector, where do you see AI making the most transformational impact in RGM over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think data science capabilities, right? It's something that is almost very much directly tied to AI capabilities, and it's something that in the RGM space we've been using data science actually for a really long time. Right, there's it probably came from a McKinsey or a BCG or some type of study, or where they're sort of giving guidance to leadership teams and CEOs, executives about this sort of pathway of development in RGM, starting with diagnostic, then moving into prediction, then moving into prescription. This is something that in the RGM space has actually been very much table stakes for a really long time, unlocking precision and granularity and the ability to reinforce objective decision making with greater and greater data. So it's not necessarily new news. I think where this will continue to develop, I think the thing that in the RGM space, the thing that's landed with the most impact is actually that computing processing speeds has actually, almost fallen in line with the abundance of data that is now available. I mean, it really is an arms race on the usefulness of the abundance of data that we have. I mean, historically, before AI and machine learning, you were almost hamstrung based on the amount of personnel that you have. But now using, different techniques, having more processing power, the ability to actually unlock these things has been more ever present than before. And so the companies that will do this well are the ones that will, one, recognize data as an asset and put the necessary infrastructure in place to get the most out of it. And then second, really using AI techniques to develop RGM types of software that can unlock this greater potential in precision, in granularity, in best meeting consumer needs.
So it's really interesting how you talk about the methodologies of doing RGM has been there for a long time. It's just that the processing speed and the agility in which we can essentially execute against these things has dramatically or drastically increased. And potentially it's going to exponentially increase as we get greater and greater compute power, right? So in terms of thinking about that, if you're an organization that's on this RGM journey right now, how do you envisage, companies setting themselves up for success, given that all of this stuff is going to become, I don't want to say easier to do, but the complexities involved is essentially going to go away.
Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily say that it's going to go away, right? We as revenue management practitioners, I think we're not for a lack of ideas on how to sort of advance the business, right? But there's always a little bit of tension, especially in the brick and mortar space, right? Not necessarily D2C, but in the brick and mortar space, you are limited by your ability to actually enable these more granular and precise strategies within the environment that you sell in, where in a lot of cases might be fairly conservative, right? You might not have a lot of very sophisticated retailers that you're working with. And so I think you can unlocking these things in terms of the actual methodology, the technique, the data science behind it is, certainly tricky. It's not necessarily as turnkey as what a lot of people would lead you to believe. However, it's a vision that can be realized. It's recognizable in the space. You can see it in the sort of pathway to the future. But I think the thing that really has to be intentionally focused on is the ability to enable this through the trade, right? Where you're almost you can only be as good as the sophistication of your trade team, the sophistication and willingness to explore these types of things with your retail customers. So it's, as much as we would like to sort of force it into the machine, force it into the model, it requires an intentional effort to enable this through CRMs as well as your trade personnel.
Amazing. So in regulated industries like tobacco or alcohol, innovation is often constrained. How does AI kind of open new opportunities for RGM that might not have been possible before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has application in you can think about it in the sort of entire spectrum of your sales cycle. The ability to unlock opportunities, right? Where I said before in your first question, Intiaz, like, that your ability to actually unlock the granularity and the precision, it was almost hamstrung by the number of personnel that you had actually processing and looking at opportunities. And especially when it comes to pricing agenda, right, which is something that I think a lot of people recognize as almost a core discipline of revenue practitioners. Your ability to find opportunities in the granularity of your information was only going to be as efficient as the number of people that you had on your team. Well, now, I mean, really, you can build, these algorithms that basically setting up a rule to say, go find me an opportunity where I can increase price, where maybe I do have an inefficient portfolio sitting in this store, and where you had one person basically combing through the data in the past. You can use some data science here and there to segment your market or have some sort of consistency in your strategy at a more sort of segmented level. But now these approaches, the way that these algorithmic AI-driven models, they can do this in mass, right? Rather than it just being, let me find an opportunity here, a little opportunity here. I mean, using these types of techniques, you can absolutely do this in scale. But again, it's always just going to be a matter of how quickly can you enable this through your sales force.
That's insane. So like essentially what you're saying is rather than running an RGM study at a business level, essentially we could look at it as a brand at a store level, with a rep going into a store and essentially optimizing the assortment that we have in particular for that store, enabled and executed through a CRM platform that they're essentially using to manage that particular store. So that level of granularity, like to run, let's say you call on 100,000 stores across the US, it's practically impossible for an RGM team with humans to run 100 different thousand on RGM studies per store for that particular market. Essentially now using these AI models, we can equip that sales rep at that store to essentially put the right assortment there and win for our company. That's insane. So now you've implemented brand pack price architectures and local variable pricing strategies at scale. How is AI changing the game for price optimization across markets with very different regulatory environments?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the way that this capability has been starting to build over the past few years, I think it very much is with, not necessarily regulation at the forefront of it, but certainly the ability to constrain these algorithms, these models, such that you're being sort of protective of the things that are important to your business, right? Let's just give a hypothetical. So if I'm building an AI price optimization model, ultimately you can envision a future, right? I mean, I know this is very sort of prognosticating, maybe a long time in the future, but where every company in a given market has an AI driven model, and ultimately it's just going to, as these AI models are sort of intersecting with one another, right? It's ultimately just raising price, right? You're using game theory to sort of push your prices up. What's good for an individual is good for the group. But where you really have to take that in stride and recognize that, look, we do have conditions that we have to meet that either protect our consumer base, protect the regulatory framework, or protect even things like brand equity, where the algorithm might tell you to drop the price, to the floor, inciting a price war or something like that. You have to almost craft these things with the constraints in mind, recognizing where I can't push the price up too much in this area because of affordability concerns or what's happening that might not necessarily be prevalent in the data, right? It's a sort of human in the loop will always have to be there to guide these things. And where, especially in highly regulated industries like the nicotine space, you have to almost always keep these in mind, right? I mean, I'm very sensitive to, as a revenue manager, a longtime revenue manager, to making sure that I'm compliant with the things that I do. I know peers that have been in the hot seat, have even been deposed by the Department of Justice, and I don't ever see myself getting into that space. My wife was a corporate attorney for a long time, so she always sort of puts the fear of God in me about making sure that I'm compliant with the things that I do. But it's always at the forefront of the things that we're creating, whether it be, algorithmic models or commercial strategies. These are things that always have to be built into the fold of the design. And, as these sort of algorithmic AI models are helping to either optimize portfolio, optimize pricing, you have to almost always build that into your constraint base as you're sort of giving guidance to the algorithm on how to actually execute a pricing strategy, portfolio strategy, or what have you.
So what's the biggest misconception leaders have about AI-driven pricing, and how do you separate, the hype from what is actually delivering profit growth?
Yeah, that one, it's a tricky question to answer. And the reason I say that is I think there's a multitude of misconceptions. To really isolate it into just a few, I would kind of come back to really first and foremost two main things. Actually, let me pause and let me sort of flip my answer. Okay, biggest misconceptions are that it's quick to do, that it's easy to create the discipline around how to actually enable this, or that it's easy to actually execute. Right? That it's a turnkey type of thing. I can flip a switch and ultimately I'm doing this overnight. None of these things are true. It's not quick, it's not cheap, and it's not easy, right? These are things that require almost an intentional effort from nearly the entire organization, right? The ability to build these things is only as good as the data that you have, how intersected it is with all of the other data that you have around you, and then your ability or your team's ability to actually create these algorithms, right? Again, they're not turnkey, right? This is an application of data science. It's using, unlocked processing power to run models in mass, right? Millions and millions and millions of different scenarios to unlock a result that's going to ultimately give you the best benefit in terms of financial outcomes, competitive outcomes, or benefits for your retail customers. And so, one, the data race, like that is a real arms race in the business world, right? I mean, I think you see a lot of these AI companies now coming out of the woodworks, and you could probably check their stock prices. Not a lot of them are really profitable, despite a tremendous stock price, right? And performance in the market. It's almost going back to the Facebook example from when Facebook was first starting to take off. Like, what is Facebook even doing? And until they start unlocking advertising space, targeting consumers, all of these types of things, this is their business model. It's really no different in our space, where the ability to capitalize, first, recognize your data as an asset, and then second, capitalize on your ability to find financial opportunities or growth opportunities in that data is key. And so very much who can get there the quickest in terms of maximizing the scale of your data and building these types of techniques around your data environment, that is going to be critical for who are going to be the leaders in name your industry for the future, right? And the ability to not only build these things, but be able to enable them with your customer base, with your industry, with your sales reps that are actually leading the engagement with retailers, that is going to be paramount. Again, it's not quick, it's not easy, and it's not cheap, right? You've got to build these things, but then you also have to empower them through your commercial organization. Right? They're all very much complementary. And if you discount your ability to do any of those one things individually, you're going to fail. And so, it's important that, one, the arms race on the data environment, making sure that you use that as an asset and an opportunity identification system. Two, to be able to build these algorithms with a high degree of accuracy. And then three, be able to actually push that out through your sales organization with sales practitioners who actually are sophisticated enough to be able to understand these things and how to apply it. These three things are going to be paramount for how this actually goes forward. And if any of one of those breaks, you're not going to actually be as successful in maximizing your opportunity.
So the way I'm hearing you, Mike, is if you don't have your house in order, having all of these tools or having all of these new capabilities that just make things faster, essentially is not necessarily going to help you, because the foundations need to be there in order to scale.
That's exactly.
It goes. I work in the marketing space predominantly, and it's the same thing there. If you haven't been disciplined about organizing your data infrastructure, about your workflows and your processes in terms of data capture, processing, and publishing that data, just by getting all of these new fancy things that just do things faster at more granularity, doesn't help you get your house in order. So yeah, it seems like there's consistency in all of these industries where it's not a silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems. Moving on to promo modeling and trade spend optimization. Trade spend is often the biggest line within a CPG P&L. How can AI-driven promo modeling unlock efficiency without sacrificing the retailer partnerships and relationships?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'll sort of lock on to a verb that you said in your question: sacrificing. Right. First of all, think if you look at it from that lens, you're missing the point. Right. This is not a sacrificing actually of retail relationships by any means. It's actually an unlocking of potential to guide where the category is headed. So, without being too transparent on any strategies or anything that any of my previous employers have ever worked on. But, I was involved in actually building an AI algorithm where we were building, after running millions and millions of scenarios, about a annual promo calendar across a number of SKUs for a given customer. And the way that we actually set this up was not just with our own products in mind, but actually as a total category. And the output of that optimization algorithm was, or the input rather, was such that we could tell the algorithm what we want to maximize, right? Whether it was overall net revenue, overall profit, overall market share, but also for the customer, right? We could go to this customer and say, hey, wouldn't you love, and let's just take a hypothetical in the convenience space. So 7-Eleven versus Circle K. So we could go to 7-Eleven and say, hey, 7-Eleven, wouldn't you love to maximize your category market share in locations where you're battling against Circle K in the candy bar space? Wouldn't that be appealing to you? Wouldn't that strengthen our partnership together if I could give you a promo calendar that is going to help you grow 100 basis points versus Circle K in these given locations? Well, of course they're going to say yes. And so the ability to, optimize whatever KPI that we're looking for, whether it's internal KPIs that we're trying to maximize, competitive KPIs that we're trying to maximize, growing market share versus our competitor, or for that retailer, we're trying to put your interests ahead of ours. And so why don't we partner together and plan the total category, not just my portfolio, but the total portfolio, such that you're more competitive versus your main competitor. And so again, thinking about it from a sacrificing of a relationship, that's the wrong lens, right? Ultimately, I think it's an enhancer of the relationship to say, I can go into it with a negotiation and say, look, I can put my needs first, or we can put your needs first. There's always going to be a little bit of that push and pull, but it's ultimately with an intention to build partnership, but also maximize outcomes. And so I definitely don't see it as a sacrificial, a relationship sacrificing benefit, but rather something that can enhance it long term, and give a recognition of the input that we're mutually giving into this category.
So previously, I've worked in the hand wash category, and in a particular market, there's two big retailers, and they each changed the promo laws or the promo guidance that everything had to be minimum for that category at a 20% discount, or either 20% discount, or you'd have to do a half price promo at least, a couple of times a year, if not a couple of times every quarter. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, by accident, I submitted a 5% promo, and what we saw is that the lift that we got from a 5% promo was comparable to a 20% promo. So,
That's great.
Because, ultimately from a consumer point of view, all they really care about in that particular category is seeing a ticket on the shelf saying that, I'm getting a branded product at a deal for that particular week that I'm walking, the physical store at the time. So we went back to the retailer and said, hey, we realize this is less trade spend, but from a category growth point of view and an absolute retailer margin point of view, we're happy to invest more promo weeks and being compliant within the number of promo weeks that we could be in a given calendar year. But by spending less, I'm actually making you more. And this is a way you can actually, if you actually take this opportunity, not only are you going to be on promo more weeks, but that's going to be an opportunity for you to capture share within this category as well. So, akin to what you're kind of saying is, I think this is where AI can actually help us, is spot these opportunities, and or execute these opportunities with given retailers who have the capabilities of doing so, to run all of these multiple pricing studies live in market, and then actually take them to scale when they do work. Shifting over to Reynolds, you transformed a multi-billion-dollar customer investment program in just a year. What role did AI play in that turnaround?
Yeah, and in this case, it didn't really have much of an application. This was something that was almost necessity to enhance, right? It was something that ultimately we found ourselves at a disadvantage in many cases in terms of the terms of that contract. Now, the one thing I will say that the application certainly of data science helped us establish was in the market segmentation. So the ability to actually create segments of customers that all mirrored a certain type of behavior, met the needs of a certain demographic of consumer, and that went into our ability to actually segment the market and say, here is the type of contract that makes sense for a given customer. But I wouldn't call it necessarily AI per se, but it certainly was a massive data undertaking, a massive segmentation model, and our ability to actually forecast the outcomes of that. While it would have been great to enhance that with, some sort of AI hybrid forecasting model or something like that, our ability to unlock that with speed at the time just wasn't there. I mean, certainly I can almost, looking back, where would we have enhanced this? I think there's certainly some opportunities to be able to do that. But, coming back to the question from before, this is not quick, it's not cheap, and it's not easy. This was something that was, like I said, a little bit of a necessity to turn around within a pretty rapid time frame. And so there really wasn't an opportunity to kind of layer in any enhanced capabilities at the time to really capitalize on. Now, that being said, obviously I'm out of that business now. I work for the parent company of Reynolds, but I do know that, this is something that is being done today, is actually our ability to be a lot more specific with our contract terms, a lot more targeted and precise with our ability to, one, implement the any sort of regulatory restrictions that we have, coming back to one of your earlier questions, and then two, be a lot more precise with the price points, the depth of discount that is going to actually motivate a consumer or a retail customer to engage in a contract with us. So this is something that is, absolutely being built right now. But, that being said, as I mentioned, it's not quick, it's not cheap, and it's not easy. This is something that's been being worked on for probably the last 18 months and is not, even recognized today as being fully deployed. But certainly something that at the time would have been nice to have, but because of the necessity to deliver something fast, we weren't really able to apply anything at scale. But now, recognizing the benefit of the application, this is something that's sort of being driven as we speak.
So in categories where, let's say, direct-to-consumer data is actually limited, how do you build the right data foundation to still make your models effective?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think I have actually quite a bit of experience in, right? As you can imagine, BAT, British American Tobacco, we're very large player in the space. We operate in somewhere around 80 to 100 markets. And, as you can imagine, with a company that size, with businesses in so many different types of environments, the data sophistication, the retail sophistication, the access to information, it's all over the place, right? From markets that have almost nothing to markets that are an abundance of information. And so, I always tell my business stakeholders, look, don't see the lack of data availability as a non-starter, right? If you tell me that you don't have any data and that's the reason you don't want to get started on something like this, I always come back to and say, you're missing the point, right? There is an abundance of information out there, and I see our primary role as revenue managers as one being, and I'll use a term that I actually heard earlier this week, as the chief dot connector, right? We're here to almost get everybody on the same page on what our primary concerns are as a business, whether it's unlocking growth potential, it's protecting the space that we have. It's bringing everybody together to recognize sort of what the common dilemma is, and then helping to reinforce objective decision making, right? Not where it might have been largely the business driven largely by intuition. We're trying to connect the dots in terms of the personnel, but also connect the dots in terms of the information that we have available to us. And I think a lot of times people will discount thinking that I have to have, some sort of syndicated data provider providing me with an abundance of information. I think that's an old world sort of school of thought. Certainly it's complementary, right? But there's certainly, I think we have key accounts probably in nearly every market that we participate in. We have POS systems in probably, every market that we participate in. And we have macroeconomic variables that are probably available by the government in nearly every market that we participate in. So yes, it puts you at a disadvantage relative to other markets, but not a disadvantage relative to your competitor in that market. And so, your ability to actually drive better enhanced commercial strategies, to be more targeted and granular with your commercial strategies, your ability to solve your consumers' needs is only reduced by your ability to be creative, right? So take the information that you have, work through creative solutions on how to actually build a framework of intelligence and enable your trade to be able to use that information that you have as an output to go and sell more stuff, to be more targeted with our consumers, to get a leg up on our competition. So it's not a non-starter, right? Which we see that all the time as revenue managers in markets where retail sophistication is maybe not where it needs to be to catch up with the global economy, but your limitations are only defined by how creative you can be. And so use the information that you have, recognize what techniques can actually capitalize on this information, and be creative with how you actually put it into practice.
So shifting gears to leadership and transformation, RGM is almost as much about culture and ways of working as it is about algorithms. What's the hardest organizational barrier you've kind of faced when embedding AI-driven RGM, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I think it really has three main constraints, two of which I'll come back to, and one of which would be new to this conversation. So the first two that I talked about before, one is recognizing data as an asset and using it to build a competitive advantage, right? If you discount your data infrastructure, your ability to harmonize information, and then use that information to reinforce commercial strategies, you're going to be left in the dust by, maybe a small competitor who unlocks that as a competitive advantage in your industry. Second is sales enablement, right? Very, I almost, and I think, a lot of trade personnel would almost share the sentiment, but with the opposite direction, right? I see, sales as almost being a lot of times the conservative arm of the business, right? Hey, this is the way that we've always done it. We're going to continue to do it that way. You have to almost convince, compel, inspire the trade part of your business to really embrace these types of unlocked, enhanced capabilities, to get them to recognize how strong of an asset it is and how much of a game changer it can be in your industry, to actually reinforce these things out into the market. And then, the third thing that I would say is the ability to, or how compelling or how convincing this information can be, right? I see the outputs of a lot of these things as being almost challenging conventional wisdom, right? You're going to show somebody in the organization who has been with the organization for a really long time something that they have always thought intuitively in their mind, this is the way that it has always been, this is the way that it is today, and this is the way that it's going to be in the future. And the outcomes of a lot of these applications in AI, right, that's going to tell you exactly like you said, Imtiaz, right, with the 5% discount. We always ran 20% discounts. We don't really know why. We think it's effective, but to the consumer, maybe it doesn't even matter. All they care about is the sign, right? And so, in your example, you put a 5% discount up on the shelf by accident. The lift was exactly the same. And it was just almost through sheer accident that you recognized how much you can save in your investment plan, how much, opportunity there is to enhance uplift on a week by week basis. And so this is, it's almost exactly the same, where you're going to come in with, things that will challenge the status quo, conventional wisdom, and your ability to convince, compel, inspire is going to be dramatically important, right? I deal with this regularly, and I always talk to my internal stakeholders to say, hey, let's recognize that this is the output of the data. I understand that you have something in your mind. Let's maybe unpack this a little bit. Why could this be the case that the model gave you an output that challenges, your conventional wisdom? And look, ultimately, sometimes those things can be validated. You can give sort of a logical rationale on why this is giving you this as an output. But sometimes, really, maybe you won't be able to. And so you've got to look for those opportunities to convince, compel, and inspire. But sometimes you also have to trust. And sometimes you also have to, if I can't convince you, well, let's maybe put it into practice in maybe a small pilot. Let's do some A/B testing. Let's minimize the risk. And let's see if a real life application of this can bring us to a common ground, right? Because you're always going to have to, there's always going to be a decision maker on who holds the purse strings, who holds the ability to execute a strategy. And your ability to convince, compel, inspire, or convince through some sort of testing is really going to be a determination of how successful you can be in these things.
Super cool. If you were advising a CPG CEO today, what are the 2 or 3 AI-enabled RGM capabilities that they should really be building right now to maximize revenue opportunity?
Yeah, I can't say it enough. And I mean, this is a comment that I've said already, but the use of data maximization is going to be an arms race. And if you look, we within this industry, the nicotine industry at large, right? I'm not so naive to think that we're the only ones that have an abundance of data. Our competitors do too, right? But I will say we are on legacy data infrastructure models, things that have sort of existed for a tremendous amount of time. And this is very much going to be an arms race. It's going to be who can set these data infrastructures up in such a way that you can gain a competitive advantage from its usefulness and application of AI and machine learning algorithms to help build your agility, your precision, your granularity, your ability to target your consumer. These are things that are going to be paramount in the business environment in the future. And if you don't put the investment in that place today, your competitor is going to, for sure. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but it will catch up with you at some point. And if you don't recognize that, we have to build, more sort of sterile data infrastructure environments, and we've got to do it quickly and we've got to do it institutionally, you're going to be left holding a bag in 10 years time of your consumers, not recognizing your consumers' needs, and your competitor doing exactly that at scale, across every single retailer. And so I can't, reinforce enough. I mean, even as we get into, budget planning for the upcoming year, this is something that I've, been very, I think, vocal internally about is, hey, we've got to do something about this. We can build all of the most sophisticated tools that are available in the industry, best in class types of solutions, but our ability to actually build these things quickly is going to be only as good as the local data infrastructure that we have in this market. And so we need to address problem one first. And now let's talk about what this unlocks, right? We can give the inspiration of the future, but we've got to build the foundation first.
Amazing. Mike, it's been a pleasure to have a chat with you today. Thank you for being on the Reimagine with AI podcast. Looking forward to having you again and understanding all the great things that you're going to get up to in the coming years. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure, Imtiaz. Great to be a participant and appreciate the invitation. And thanks for the thought-provoking conversation. And hope to see you soon.
Thank you. That was my conversation with Michael Healy. And what stood out to me was just how deeply we're rethinking pricing, trade strategy, and the role of data in RGM in light of AI's rapid evolution. We covered how AI is making store-level pricing strategies finally scalable, why sales enablement, not just algorithms, is the real unlock, and what most leaders are still getting wrong about the cost, complexity, and culture shifts needed to make AI actually work. I hope this gave you a new perspective on how to scale precision without losing control, and where the real ROI lies when data and decisions finally align. If you found this episode helpful, share it with someone working in pricing, RGM, or commercial strategy who's struggling with the same questions. And if you want to keep learning about how leaders are applying AI to drive real-world results, subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. Thanks for being part of the Reimagine with AI community. I'll see you next time.